So the first button panel here is fairly easy. You pull up 37 stitches and then you knit for 7 rows. The second button panel is going to be a little bit more complicated because now you're putting in the button holes. So just like in the last panel, you're going to pull up 37 stitches and then you're going to knit 2 rows. And then your third row is going to be where you start your buttonholes. So first I'm going to do 2 stitches normally. 1, 2. And now I'm going to do my first buttonhole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit 2 stitches together, and then I'm going to use a technique called yarn over, which basically just means I bring my yarn over and around the needle, and then I just continue for 4 stitches. So now if you look closely, you can see where my buttonhole is opening up. So now we're going to repeat that again. Knit 2 together, then yarn over, and keep knitting normally for another 4 stitches. So I've now made 2 buttonholes, and I'm going to want a total of 6 in this panel. I've now completed my buttonhole row, and I'm working on the next row. So you can see that when you get to your yarn over stitch, it looks a little bit funny. The easiest way to do that is to knit through the back of the stitch like this. And now you can see that buttonhole opening up a little more. And that will accommodate a nice 1/2-inch button. So once again, when you get to the yarn over stitch, go through the back, nice and easy. And you got your buttonhole. Now what you're going to need is 6 buttons, needle, and thread. Now, before you start sewing your buttons on, you're going to want to make sure that they fit. And the easiest way to do that is take your button and just feed it through the hole. You want it to be slightly snug so that it's not popping off randomly, but you don't want it to be really tough to get through there. Just a little bit of tension. Get yourself a good length of thread and feed it through your needle. Now I'm going to show you a quick trick knot that I like to use. You're going to take the end of your thread. By the way, this is thread is doubled up here. So you take the 2 ends and you pinch them against the needle there. Then you wrap around 1, 2, 3 times. Pinch those loops onto your needle, and then slide it all the way down your thread. Now you got a handy knot at the end. So to put these on, what you're going to do is you're going to line up your 2 button panels nice and neat. And at this point you're going to be able to see your buttonholes pretty clearly. So once everything's lined up, you're just going to just eyeball it. It doesn't need to be perfect. And pinch it in place. And just come up from behind. And sometimes if your knot isn't big enough, it's just going to pop right through. Just go back and give it another try. Still pinching the button in place. You can either crisscross or you can do 2 parallel lines. I prefer to crisscross. So I'm going to go diagonally into the opposite hole and pull that tight. Now, to avoid having the little tail hanging out here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to wrap my thread over it each time, so it's going to get a little shorter with each stitch. I'm going to feel for the hole in my button. And cross again. Now you're going to need to go around a few times just to make sure it's secure. So once your button's nice and secure and you know it's not going anywhere, you're going to want to tie it off. So what you're going to do is you're going to sew through one of your previous stitches here. But before you tighten that stitch all the way, you're going to come around again. You go through the loop once and twice. And now you're going to pull that tight. You can do that again a couple times for extra measure if you want. I always like to do another little half hitch here. Then once your knot's in place, you want to come in and go under as many of your stitches as you can. And what you're doing here is you're providing yourself a little tail of thread that's going to be hidden, but it's going to enable you to cut your thread without cutting too close to your knot. Because as you know by now, if you cut too close to a knot, it comes unraveled. So if you look close, kind of hidden all my tails there. So in a previous video I told you I was going to show you another way to hide these ends when you're pulling up. And so actually all I'm going to do is I'm just going to wrap my yarn around that tail as I'm making my stitches. And then you can just snip off that last little bit. Now I'm going to show you how to work with stitch markers, and it's actually really easy. So I just got some little plastic ones here, and I'm going to need 2 for this pattern. And so I've knit my 22 stitches. I'm going to slip one of those on. And then I'm just going to continue. Now when I come to the next row, working with the stitch marker, I'm going to purl the one right in front of it, then just slip the stitch marker onto the other needle, and just continue purling the way I was. There are a couple different ways to increase stitches. One of them is by reaching underneath to the previous row, like this, and knitting like that. But for this pattern, I'm using the knit one front and back technique. So you start off knitting just like it's a normal stitch, but instead of slipping it off your left hand needle, you're going to come around and go into the back loop of the stitch as well. And bring your yarn around and pull it through. So you've just knit 2 stitches in the same loop. knit in the front of the stitch, leave it on the left-hand needle, and then knit in the back of the stitch. Pull through and slip it off the needle. Once you've reached the end of the hood, you're going to want to shuffle your needles around a little bit so you can more easily perform the Kitchener stitch. As you can see, I have the ends of my needles towards the center of the hood, and they're both pointing outward. This is also an ideal time to get your measurements for the lining of the hood, and in the next video is when I will be going over how to do the lining.